Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Zahra Sethna. I'm here with Susan Harley of Courageous Conversations, and this is our weekly book chat live, talking about the preparation. Susan, hello. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. Nice to see you, Zara.
You as well. Look at you sitting outside. Tell us about your backdrop.
I just thought it'd be nice to sit in the garden. We're making the most of these lovely fall days or autumn days, as we would call them, where it's
Mhm.
being just really nice and warm. Yeah.
Lovely. Oh, I'm so glad. It's nice to see you enjoying the fresh air. So tell us where we are in our reading of the preparation.
We're on chapter 7,
Hmm.
which is entitled Forget About Mentoring, Get a Patron. And I found it fascinating. And I've been looking up different definitions and lots of thoughts about it.
Mm,
And yeah, so it's the idea of, as a young person, you need guidance in some way. So, what is the best way to get that help and encouragement? And one of the things I loved about the beginning of the book, it said to think about your career not as a ladder, but
mhm.
as a spider's web. So
Interesting.
it's all about networking and about who you know,
Right.
which then I can see seeded this chapter, which is mentoring, which is more about a one-to-one relationship where you're asking somebody, usually older, for guidance and all of those sort of things to help you through this initial stage. Whereas what they propose is a patron will actually take you under their wing, but on the understanding that you're doing something for them.
Hmm.
So it's a two-way relationship. So there's something in it for them. That's how I took it, rather than it being one way, like a mentoring or a teaching relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, there are quite a few threads to pull out of this chapter. I gave it a light reading. I think you may have gone a little bit deeper in the sense of looking up definitions and things like that. But it is really interesting because you know, I think the idea of having somebody who's more advanced in their career giving advice to someone who's more junior in their career is a really interesting one, and obviously has been recognized for a very long time. And in the book, it goes right back again to the Roman times and talking about this patron client relationship. But if we think about more modern times, we actually have formalized internship programs where students before they graduate can go and apprentice or intern and learn about different fields. And those have existed for a long time and have morphed along the way. So here in the United States, anyway, there was a big argument publicly about whether those should be paid or unpaid. They became quite extractive and exploitative of interns as well. So in my career, when we've had interns join us, there's always been a really explicit need to describe what you want that intern to do, so they're not just I mean, back in the day when I was young, it was considered stuffing envelopes, just this rote task that needed to get done, get the intern to do it. And now it's really about what will they learn, what will they gain, what will they develop from doing this. You can't just give them all the grunt tasks that you don't want to do. You have to really make sure that they're doing something that's productive and useful. So the idea of an intern has morphed, and this is kind of turning it on its head, or maybe adding to it by thinking about a patron rather than a mentor. Although I think there's still a lot of parallels to it. And if we go back into history, the idea was being an apprentice. So this was when people weren't going to formal education necessarily, but you picked a trade and then you apprenticed to a master. Um, and so there's obviously lots and lots of echoes through history of this type of relationship, but there are also a lot of pitfalls. So I think that's maybe where we can um, pick up.
Yeah, I'll echo your point about this isn't new. And my own grandson's in his 3rd year of university, and in that year he gets what's called placements, which are interns, not paid. I think a little pittance of a daily allowance, but he is learning a trade. And so that makes a big difference. And the other thing I was thinking about, because there's there's a lot of controversy about that, about it's just people aren't paid and the competition for jobs is so hard.
Right.
And I think this is another aspect about the young people going into the world. So mentoring, teaching, guidance isn't new. And I was also fascinated by the growth of the coaching business. So people recognize that they need help and guidance, and they're willing to pay for it nowadays. One of the questions I have, which I don't have the answer, is how can a young person choose a mentor or a patron? Surely maybe their parents make that connection. I don't know. Because how will they know when somebody's good? And the example that was given in the book, which I'll come on to, but the first thing I wanted to say, because I looked up the difference, and apparently the word mentor comes from the Greek again, so there's lots of references to the Greeks and the Romans, but it was Odysseus and a guide, an advisor, and someone who remembers, who thinks, who connects, who experiences. So that's a mentor. And then we get into the whole idea of a patron, and its root is from the word patri, which means male dominance. And of course, then it led me off to this whole thing about pater, which is the word for father, patriot. There's, patriarchy. There's a whole realm of words around that. And the reason I went down that little spiral was the example that was given in the book of a really good relationship, or like the example of a relationship that really worked was between Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance. Now, I'm not in America, so I don't know the nuances of it, only what I pick up over here, because Thiel also has interests in the UK. But I thought that was really interesting that J.D. Vance was handpicked, I think it was in 2011, with about 10 or 12 students to listen to a talk at university by Peter Thiel, who then cherry-picked 3 of them to go on and join his companies, and 2 of them wrote books with him. And then he bankrolled 2 of them, but one of them got to be vice president. So, that example of the sort of Roman, I think the example in the book was sort of Julius Caesar, that when you find a patron, you have to be able to add value. You have to become their man, follow their philosophy or their politics, be in their network or create more family ties. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. So I don't know what you thought of that as an American, as a Canadian in America.
Canadian American. Well, but yes, both. I mean, so I think what you raise is super interesting. It is a really interesting and really timely example, because we can see in real time how it's working. So it's actually a great example, because if you're looking at the patron client relationship, with JD Vance being in that client position, you really can see how it was a symbiotic relationship. There were things that Peter Thiel, even though he was a billionaire, could not achieve politically, that he could do through JD Vance. And so there's mutual benefit on both sides. Of course, then this thought experiment very quickly tips into what are the outcomes of that relationship and how it's impacting all of us. But it's a great example then of how, a patron might choose a younger client or protege who can benefit them. The draws on that person in terms of influence then also really comes very clearly to the fore. So, if you have a powerful patron who puts you in positions that you otherwise may not have reached as quickly or potentially ever, what do you owe that person? What are you giving up in order to get what you're getting out of that patron? And how long does that relationship survive? Because that person who put you there could just as easily pull you out of it with huge consequences. So I think it does raise huge questions. And if you think back to the parallel, the sort of mentor protege relationship, I think in a modern context, if you think about mentoring someone younger, you really aren't thinking as much about what you're getting out of it, other than just passing along some life experience or some knowledge that you have that you think might help somebody else. Maybe along the way, there are mutual benefits that come up, but that isn't the reason why you engage in that relationship. So a couple of different thoughts that we can pick up on there.
Yeah, I think so, because a patron could be a patron of the arts, where you're actually supporting people and you get the kudos from that, but you're not actually getting anything of value. But whereas this seems absolutely political and having influence and power, and this whole idea of dominance and control. And I don't know, I just pick up on various things that Teal's doing, which is about surveillance and the whole techno-fascism, as Yanis Varoufakis would call it, where we are surveyed and controlled. And I know he's been over in the UK and he's been talking to people, because Palantir is working in what's called our National Health Service, which has everybody's records. It's apparently the jewel in the crown. And they're already doing deals and things over this. And then we've got the other thing that comes into it, because Curtis Yarwood was in the UK. He was in London this weekend.
Curtis Yarvin.
Yeah. And he was at a philosophy festival. And apparently lots of people were really lapping up what he was saying. Well, I mean, he wants to demolish democracy.
Yeah.
So if you think about a spider's web, is this a spider's web that we really want to encourage in the young? Are we grooming them to a certain way, and I use that word carefully, to perpetuate a system that is all about inequality? Or are we inspiring them to bring in a different world, a world which is fairer and more equal, and more peaceful?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on a lot of really interesting ideas. And obviously this is not mutually exclusive. I mean, I think there are a lot of ideas that are sketched out in this chapter that can be harnessed and used in really productive ways. I think the danger is what you just sketched out, that it can also be used in ways that can be furthering ideas and ideologies that can be extremely harmful. And in many ways, if I think about my own career, which I always put in inverted commas, because I never really set out to have a career. It just sort of, one thing led to another. But I always had a sense that this kind of a system already existed, and it was something that other people took part in, not me. I wasn't one of those who was selected or chosen or given the ladder. But I could see around me that other people were given those opportunities. And not to disparage them, but there were people who, we started out at the same place and they climbed very, very quickly. And it was only through relationships, not through necessarily skills or knowledge, because we were 23 at the same time. And so that it's not like they had more experiences than I did. Really, I knew those people well enough to know that we were, equivalents. And then those people shot up, and you could see that they had relationships that were helping them out. And whether that was through family connections or through networks that they built in university, more power to them. If that was hand built, if they made networks for themselves while they were studying, then they truly deserved that little bump that they got, because that is what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
You're supposed to find those people who will help you, and likewise who you'll be able to help just by knowing each other. That's what networking is. And it's not intrinsically a bad idea. But when you get into these large bureaucracies, like the ones that I worked in the earlier parts of my career, you can also see how there were definitely fiefdoms within the large organization. And you could see where the fulcrum was, the person with power and all the little nodes around them who serviced them. They were obviously giving value to that person and extracting probably double in value in terms of their own power that they could create. So if you think about it as a network with a node and spokes that come off of it, I can see this clearly in the experience that I had when I worked in international development in large bureaucracies. That is totally how it worked. I was outside of it, could see it very clearly, but I was never knowingly a spoke in somebody else's node. And the first sign that I had that maybe I was being co-opted into something like that to be used in a way, I turned and ran. I would have loved to have a mentor who truly, showed me, and I did. I've been super fortunate to have wonderful people that I worked with who it was just much more informal. They just I saw something in them and they saw something in me, and we had a very natural and very respectful relationship. But there were also people who really were a little bit more predatory about the whole thing.
Yeah, because it's nothing new, is it? They quote the Romans and the Greeks, and people have been doing things for their own advantage. And I think it's really interesting. What you talk about, it's like, well, it was more about a relationship that we got on well with each other and wanted the best for each other, rather than thinking, what's my agenda, and how can this person enable me? Because I felt with the patron, it was more like, you've got to work to their agenda.
Yeah.
Rather than they're helping you meet their agenda, your agenda. And the other thing I thought was really interesting, if you look at it through a collapse lens, which we both do, then having hierarchical dominant systems weakens societies. If you look at Peter Turchin and the recent work of Luke Kemp, then they've looked back over history of collapse, and they've said that societies which are more democratic fare better when disaster and collapse happens to them. They're more resilient. Whereas if you have an abundance, so overproduction, I think they call it, of the elite, then there is so much infighting going on, and fighting over resources, and also about who's going to be in control. So my question reading this was, are we, is this example just perpetuating a system which is now past its due date, but also weakening us for what we are having to deal with and go through in a sort of meta-crisis way?
Yeah. I think it's an absolutely pertinent question in terms of, does it actually foster fragility? It may be a system that works really well when resources are abundant and there's lots to go around, and everybody's in production mode. But when you're in crisis, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's much more important to start thinking about bringing everyone along in that smaller community, because the weakest point is everybody's weakest point. And so you want to actually make sure, if you think about it in the sense of community, not everyone is going to have the same skills, the same strength, or the same resources. But if we can share those, then we all benefit. It's obviously a little bit of a utopian ideal to think that it would all work perfectly in that way. But, if you think about mentoring in that collapse aware perspective, for example, someone who has gardened or farmed in your area for many decades, if you're new to that area and you're planting your first garden, you want to talk to that person who's done 20 of them before and say, what works, what doesn't, what should I plant, what should I avoid, what are the pitfalls? Because you don't have 20 years to make those errors. You want to take that information and implement it right away. And so then just a really simple example, obviously, that's where having somebody more experienced who can share their information with you willingly is wonderful. And I think that one of the things that came to my mind is for those of us who are not the young people starting out, but who are the older people who have the experience, whether positive or negative experience, we have to put ourselves in the mindset of wanting to be a mentor as well. Not everybody thinks about what they have to share or what they could add to somebody else's, but and especially when you're still in a corporate environment, I think, if you're say in your 40s or 50s, you're still thinking about how much more you can grow within your own community and you're looking up rather than down. You have to actually consciously think about, I'm maybe at a stage now where I'm learning as much as I can in this role. And now it's about teaching. Now it's about helping others who used to be, who are in a position that I used to be in. And I can give them, I can take what I've learned, take what I've experienced and actually share it. And it's the same even outside of a corporate environment, but it's I think a very clear analogy when you think about it through that lens. I don't think enough people do that. I saw a lot of people hit that stage of their career and just kind of want to hold on rather than let go and share and say, I've done almost as much as I can do here. It's time for me to actually start benefiting others.
It's a very, very different mindset, isn't it? Because we've been taught to be competitive, that other people are a threat, and especially in organisations, that we don't want any young upstart coming. And I think that's another one. And, the other thing I think about is that the elites, and certainly in the UK, and I don't know how it works over the pond, but we have like the old boys network. So if you look at politics, they all went to Eton usually. They either went to Cambridge or Oxford. So they perpetuate a system that's worked for hundreds of years. Right. And we're just starting off going, actually, this doesn't work for us. And we don't have a sort of clear plan. They have succession. They know exactly if somebody's coming up through the ranks, where they'll position them and how long they'll wait there and all the rest of it. And when they've got to give up power, that is how they're brought up. That's how they are encouraged as young and to go through their sort of career with that in mind, that they're always going to be getting the next generation ready. And that's how they keep their wealth. That's how they keep their power. We don't have that. And except, as you said, in those examples which you so beautifully made, which might be about gardening or farming, where we're more altruistic and we're saying, we have here community market gardens, so we all pay an annual amount to have a share in the produce. And we've got some very enthusiastic young people who are amazing, but the laws changed last year. So instead of being able to have apprenticeships where they just provided accommodation, and lots of young people applied because they wanted to learn how to garden, they wanted to go on the land, they saw that that's where their future was in food security and things like that. But our government changed the law so that they had to be paid. So that cut that off. Now, you could cynically say, why would they do that to small producers? But they did. And so I think the odds are stacked against us. against a system that has worked like clockwork for hundreds of years. And my argument with the book was, you're just perpetuating something we don't want for our young people anymore. We don't want a hierarchy of dominance and inequality, and especially funded by billionaires who don't seem to have our interests at heart. Well, definitely don't have our interests at heart, and are trying to destroy a lot of our freedoms. So, you know, maybe they didn't think like that. Maybe they admired them. Maybe they didn't think about the other connotations. But it is interesting.
It is. It's super interesting. I think, especially since the last 6 chapters have been so focused on the ideas of virtues and values and competencies and things like that. Then, you know, to then read about the relationship between Peter Thiel and JD Vance and others in that sphere really has been a mind shift in terms of just values, you know. So I think you definitely, this chapter struck a chord with you, I can tell. But I think it's good. I think it's really good because there are some really strong ideas that can be shaped in a positive way. But I think it's also one that we really have to recognize that this type of relationship, as you say, can just perpetuate things that we would like to see changed. It can create an inequality or just strengthen inequalities that already exist. It can just continue to perpetuate this insider-outsider world that we already inhabit. I mean, I know as I said earlier, I've really felt that. You can see other people creating these networks, and perhaps it's, you know, what the book says is, in order to attract the attention of the person in the network that you would like to join, you just have to be interesting and useful. And so I think the devil's advocate might say, well, Zahra, maybe you just weren't interesting enough. Maybe you didn't make yourself of value enough to be invited into that network. What are your thoughts, Susan?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I love the fact that the book stopped me thinking about all these things. And do you remember last week we talked about dissonance, didn't we? About being a strong moral character and living in a world where there isn't a lot of morality anymore, and certainly not from our leaders. So I think that's what shook me when I saw the examples. And I think sometimes they refer to the founding fathers. Well, I mean, they owned slaves. And there are all sorts of things about that. So I'm not quite sure where they're coming from with those examples. And it would be good to have other examples which are much more altruistic, or that sort of idea, as you said, about being an elder, where you are guiding young people because you recognize from your life's experiences and your work experiences that those sort of political positionings and having to be in with the in crowd and compromising probably your values and your ethics, or it's only certain people who lack any empathy or compassion and are cutthroat and competitive. I mean, you only have to look at programs like The Apprentice, which is also about patron and client, is that people are ruthless to get a position. In this country, it was Alan Sugar, but in US, it was Trump, to work in one of their companies.
Yeah.
That is not a good, healthy model. It's got us in the mess that we're in, and it's certainly not going to get us out of the mess that we're in. Yeah. So it got me thinking about that, which is never a bad thing. But I just wondered if anybody else has got any thoughts. We don't know if there's any comments or any questions coming through.
Yeah, let's see. No comments at the moment.
Welcome.
Yeah.
And we never said welcome to everybody. We just launched straight in. So apologies for that. And thank you for joining us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And like you said, Susan, I think this is a really interesting chapter to read and reread and really ponder, because there's lots in there. There are some really good ideas and some things that can be taken, and we've taken certain threads out of it, but it can't be read exclusively through that lens, because we've been talking about corporate ladders and political systems, but Matt himself is an entrepreneur. He's not someone who existed in that corporate world. And so, this kind of mutually beneficial relationship when starting out entrepreneurial startups is a completely different paradigm. And I think really an interesting one to consider. I think you have some experience in that realm, whereas mine has been either self-employed or employed. I mean, it's really just been a very black and white experience in that sense. And then I think the other interesting idea is, we've talked about a more altruistic approach to just sharing and helping. But again, if you go back to the idea of apprenticeships, if you're back in the day, you were a blacksmith, you had a young person come and work with you, you taught them, but they were your laborer as well. And then it was your succession plan was kind of built in, right? You had somebody who could take over that business for you as you started to phase out of it. So if we modernize that idea, there's, even without the altruism, there's, again, this mutually beneficial relationship. And you can see all around us, we've talked to somebody who has a auto mechanics shop, and he can't find any young people who want to come and work with him. So he's all alone doing this thing. And the day he stops being able to do it all by himself, that's it. The business is done. There isn't a young person coming in to join and learn from him. And he can share not only just the how to work on a car piece of it, but how to run this as a business. And these are the ins and outs. And we're really lacking that. We've broken a chain that had existed for a very long time, and we haven't replaced it with anything particularly useful. So I really do think there's a lot of interesting ideas brought up by this chapter.
I think so as well. And I mean, historically in this country, apprenticeships were within families. So by training your children, and also you were getting them to work because they had to, you were investing in your own future, that they would look after you when the time came. And picking up on one thing you said, I know from being a business owner and entrepreneur, that was the other thing I felt was good about the book. Yeah, I was looking for people who were curious, who were enthusiastic, who would add value. Those were the things that you would pick up in an interview. It wasn't all their academic achievements. It was those personality traits. And I think that's really good advice to give anybody, but particularly the young, to add value, to be somebody that people wanted to be around, because naturally people will help them. So I think this whole area is very fertile about coaching. I mean, we can see how popular it is. I mean, LinkedIn and anybody who's selling anything is like, well, how to do this, how to do that. We're all really hungry to know how to get about and have more fulfilled lives, and whether that is success in the traditional sense, that unfortunately we've been programmed to be more productive, to want wealth, to want desire. I mean, one of the, this is the next chapter, which I've also looked at, which we will talk about next, well, no, we won't talk about next week because we're going to have a pause, aren't we? But I thought that was interesting about the financial aspects. So perhaps we just need to sort of press pause there and say, we're going to have a pause next week. I might pop in and just give some thoughts about the financial chapter. And if not, we will be meeting here again in a couple of weeks' time.
That's right. Yeah, I will be off for the next 2 Thursdays, October 2nd and October 9th. Because we will be off grid for a little while. But Susan will be with you certainly on the 9th, if not the 2nd, to continue these conversations. And we thank everybody for joining us and bearing with us as we have these conversations. This is, I think, a really good book to start with, because it is taking us so many places in terms of things to talk about. And I would love to pick up actually with this the next time we talk, or even just through the chat or the comments on these posts in Substack, because as I said, there's so many different ideas. And one of the questions maybe that I would leave you and the audience with is, how do you choose that person as your mentor? And this can be if you're advising a young person, but for all of us. I mean, I'm in my 50s, but I would still like to have somebody as a mentor to show me certain aspects of things that I have yet to learn. So, I think there's some really interesting questions to ask ourselves about who do we want as a mentor? Is it someone who's like us, or someone who's very dissimilar to us? Do you learn more from someone who has had a completely different experience from you than you would from someone who has had a very similar path to you? Or is it a mix of both? And it makes me think of, during that whole DEI period where they were creating these corporate affinity groups. And so, for example, and again, I think it came from a good intention, but it became a very blunt tool. So I, as a woman of East Indian descent, would be paired up with potentially another person with the exact same ethnic characteristics as me. I don't know that necessarily I would learn more from an Indian woman that I worked with than I would from anyone else, but that is how that structure would have worked. And for some people, maybe it would have made them feel better that there was someone who looks like them, who had a path that I could follow. But I just think it's a lot. There are a lot of really good questions to be asked. I personally don't know that the affinity group path was the right path. And anyway, it seems to have dissolved now into some new form. But anyway, questions. I don't have all the answers. Just would love to hear what others think.
Yeah, likewise. And one of the other things that we haven't mentioned at all is how many people, not just young people, but all people, myself included, are going to AI to mentor us, to guide us, to coach us. Yeah, that offers a whole other thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of we're going external, looking for answers, and the whole thing about knowing who you are, knowing thyself, knowing your values, and being virtuous is building a stronger inner core.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, very thought-provoking. Really enjoyed discussion.
Before we pop off, we did have one comment from Parameter 9 who says, I'm tempted to say make how-to YouTube videos.
Yes. Yeah, well, people do, don't they? I mean, I think that's why they're so popular. Because that whole thing, I mean, I got involved in e-learning, as it was called then, 25 years ago, and people said, oh no, it will take off from, but now everything's online. You can learn everything. My grandson was learning to be a magician with his card tricks at age 10, looking at YouTube.
Yeah.
So this is what it's about, and it's a great thing. I mean, it's an equalizer, isn't it, in terms of people learning and getting guidance. So it's obviously a human need. We want to evolve, we want to grow. So on that note, I say goodbye from my garden.
Yes, goodbye. Enjoy your waning days of summer and your early autumn. And I won't see you next week, but good luck. And I'll see you back here in 3 weeks' time.
3 weeks. Enjoy your travels and being off grid. How wonderful.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.